All right, you ready?
Yeah,
I'm Austin Lugo.
I'm Andrew Harp.
This is With Nothing to Say.
Let's talk about I'm Not There.
This week, we watched the film I'm Not There, the sort of quasi biopic thing of,
hmm
of Bob Dylan. And
Yeah.
to set
Never
up a
mentioned, by the way. Bob Dylan is not never mentioned
never
once in the
not
entire
once, as
movie.
he mentioned, although of course they use all of his music. So
Yeah,
uh,
and they show an image of him at the very end, like footage of him at the very, very end of the movie.
and to set a bit of context here, the year was 2017. I just moved to New York City. I was going to NYU at the time. We're about 2 years out of high school by this point. And I'd listened to a little bit of Bob Dylan. I'd listened to Bob Dylan here or there. And for some reason, Bob Dylan seemed to be the only thing I wanted to listen to when I was in New York City. I don't know why. I mean, I spent a couple of months there, and there was just something about it that just felt like home in this strange way. And when the Spotify Wrapped came at the end of the year, I learned that I had listened to Bob Dylan more than anyone else on Spotify. I was the number one listener of Bob Dylan. I had listened to hundreds and hundreds of hours of Bob Dylan in the year 2017. And while I haven't listened to nearly as much Bob Dylan as I did that year, Bob Dylan has long been my favorite musician of all time and probably still is. And we were talking a couple of weeks ago about you going to see that Bob Dylan show and going to another Bob Dylan show. And when you said that he was going to be in the area, sort of, I immediately bought tickets. So I do get the luxury of going to see Bob Dylan August 4th with Willie Nelson and John Mellencamp. So I'm sure that that'll be a very exciting experience. But I have to admit, I was a bit skeptical coming into this. I mean, I love Todd Haynes.
You never seen it?
Never seen it. I've seen tons of clips of this before,
I don't
uh,
think I have seen any clips.
particularly from the interview scenes
Oh right,
with
yeah,
Kate
like oh
Blanchett.
yeah, Kate Blanchett, yeah. The clips. I remember when I was like, what this movie came out in what 2007, right?
2007.
Yeah,
Yeah.
November 2007. I remember like seeing clips. So like what I was maybe like 10, 11, 12 or something like that. I remember seeing clips on TV of like my parents watching TV like Oprah or something like that, and like people and like seeing clips of like Kate Blanchett doing her thing in the movie. Because I think like at the time that was such like a high acting point that year, right? Her part of the movie is a majority of the movie as well, I would say. Her performance is most of the movie. And yeah, I mean she's really good.
It's truly an incredible performance. Of course, this film has six people who play different characters who I suppose represent the different personas, as it were,
Yeah, like different
of Bob Dylan.
subsections of him.
Different
Yeah,
genres, different ways he's identified himself through the
different parts of
years.
his brain.
Yeah, for sure. And this is one of the things that I really love about Bob Dylan. When we think about a lot of musicians, no matter how long or short the careers were, and of course, Bob Dylan has one of the longest careers in music history. I mean, my God, this guy's been
It's still
making
going.
since 1960, and he's still making music. He's like 90 something years old, and he's on tour, which is just wild. And what's even more insane about Bob Dylan is his refusal to ever be nostalgic about his own past and his constant need to be
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
creating something new. I mean, you look,
hmm
sure, it's all within the like Bob Dylan music has a very specific sound to it. It's all Bob Dylan music. But when you go from his early stuff to his electric stuff to when he gets into country and then Americana and then back in the folk revival, and there's just all these different parts of him, and he's so willing to just be in music. And of course, in the 2000s, he wrote a lot of scores, and it's just incredible to
His
see.
Frank Sinatra albums, his trilogy of amazing
Oh,
Frank Sinatra albums,
yeah,
crooner albums that are amazing.
his crooner albums. Oh
Yeah.
my God, this man, he just refuses to be held by a specific thing, a specific genre, and of course, famously, the only musician to ever win the Nobel Prize for poetry, which was, I know, a moment that everyone was very angry about, but I think
It's
well
fine.
deserved.
It doesn't matter anyway.
It doesn't matter. But oh gosh, I was still skeptical going into this because I did think that this was a biopic, which I guess technically
I knew
it
that it was like
is
different than I mean, it's like a very like different way to approach the biopic formula, which I appreciate.
for sure.
And
And
I knew it was gonna be that way. I knew it's like several actors playing Bob Dylan. But yeah, it's like but not really like not really playing Bob Dylan, more just like it's kind of like taking Bob Dylan, kind of like breaking him off into like several different characters that all exist in the same universe, basically. Like you have like the Heath Ledger character, the Christian Bale character, and they all kind of represent like different like parts of his life, different like subsections of him. Like you have like the literally like the little like the kid, the Woody Guthrie kid, that kind of like represents like Dylan's like early fascination with Woody Guthrie. Like his fascination with that style of music with for Woody Guthrie in general, the western kind of guitar, all you got is a guitar, you're just traveling and playing songs and fighting against the man kind of thing. And but it's not like, I don't think he literally did those things. Dylan literally did those things that the character does in the movie. It just kind of represents that part of his life and his that part of his brain, his thinking.
yeah, and I think what this film does so well, and the reason I got up is because I actually found this book for like a quarter at the used bookstore the other day, the Bob Dylan Chronicles, which
Have you ever read that?
I haven't read it before. Have you?
What?
You've read this though,
That's crazy.
right?
I've read all of his books. I've
Okay.
read all the books that he's written. His new one, that one, Tarantula, which
Hmm.
they show him writing in the movie.
Yeah.
Tarantula, not really worth reading. Chronicles is worth reading. It's more kind of like a novel. It's more kind of like, it's not really like I wouldn't like put too much of a grain of salt into what Dylan has to say because he doesn't care. But it's a nice, well written kind of novel esque kind of memoir. And he talks a lot about Guthrie in it, and he talks about like just like what the Woody Guthrie character does in the movie, seeing and meeting with and talking with Woody Guthrie as he's on his deathbed in the hospital. He did do that.
Really? So that's an
No,
actual
he really no. Bob Dylan actually did know Woody Guthrie, and he did. Yeah, he did do that. He met him at the hospital and talked to him.
wow. It's and I think this is one of the great things about this film is Bob Dylan is really more of a mythological character than he
He really
is
is.
a human
Yeah,
being in every sense of the word. And of course, every perhaps famous person has a bit of mythology to them, no
he's
matter
so
what
mysterious.
part of history. But
He refused to talk about himself in any kind of
exactly.
like way. Like watch any interview, like go on YouTube and look up any interview of him. Like there's nothing. There's
Nonsense.
there's very few illuminating interviews where he's talking about himself. It's really, they're very few and far between. The music speaks for itself, I think.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why I was so skeptical going into this film. It's like, how are you going to capture the myth of Bob Dylan? Because there's not really person there. I mean, of course, he is a real person, but he's completely uninterested in the human being Bob Dylan and what that means and his past and his history. And he's so much more interested in creating these different myths. I mean, we see that moment where Woody is thrown out of a circus, a carnival, or whatever, right? Traveling at the freak show, which in Bob Dylan's early interviews, whenever they asked him about his past,
Yeah,
because that's such a mysterious part of his life before he became Bob Dylan, he would say all the
Robert
time that
Zimmerman,
he was right. He traveled with a carnival and he was part of a freak show and all these different things. And
which
it's
probably
just
wasn't true.
no. I mean
No,
maybe, but most likely
no,
no.
he just no, he went to like, he grew up in Minnesota. He went to college, and then he was like, "Oh, I'm just gonna move to New York," and then he did
And then he
that.
did it. I love Bob Dylan so much. I mean, this movie. Oh
No,
my.
I do too. Yeah, I will say, look. So here's what I'll say about the movie. Here's what I'll say about the movie. I think ultimately the movie is a failed project. I think that what it's trying to do, but I do like what it's trying to do. Like I love like Todd Haynes. He's one of the greatest directors working today. He's amazing. But I think that and in the way that he approaches this movie to kind of like take the music biopic formula and like spin it on its head, I think is great. But I think the movie is very formless. It's a little too long, and I just think it's like way too like all over the place, in my opinion. However, I will say, like, I was thinking about this movie, and I was also thinking about the fact that they're making another Dylan biopic starring Timothy Chalamet. And I was
Really?
thinking about how
Okay.
terrible that. Did you not know about this?
No.
What?
I
That
feel like
I
the
believe
Timothy
this is
Chalamet
happening.
part sounds familiar, but who's
I feel
directing
like
this?
I've
Who's
told you
making this
this. I
movie?
don't know who's making it. I think it's James Mangold. I think it's the Wolverine guy
I
or
think you're
the
right.
Logan guy. The Ferrari guy. Not Ferrari, like Ford
Ford
versus
versus
Ferrari guy.
Ferrari.
Right. I think he's doing it. I might be wrong, but I think he's doing it.
No, I think you're right.
That movie's gonna be terrible. It's just gonna be like a straight ahead, like conclusive Dylan biopic that's just gonna focus on his like 65, 66 years, right? Which again, this movie is the majority of that. And my problem with that is that like as much as the sections of I'm Not There that focus on his 65, 66 persona are pretty good and entertaining, we do already have Don't Look Back.
Right.
And Don't Look Back is great. It's not perfect. I don't think it's like a perfect movie. Have you ever seen his the Dylan film that he directed and edited called Eat the Document?
No.
That was like a documentary that he shot and directed and edited of footage that he took on that same tour that Don't Look Back is in. And it's a little bit more like fun and freewheeling.
Okay. Yeah.
And like John Lennon is in it. He appears in it.
Of course.
It's also a documentary, more kind of like a film, like more kind of like an art film. It's like less than an hour, I think. Yeah, so like you already have Eat the Document, you already have Don't Look Back. So the stuff in I'm Not There is great and all. Like it's very well done. Like the craft is there. It's just like, we already have like the real things, I guess. That might be kind of like reductive to say, but I don't know. That's just kind of how I feel about those sections of the movie. But again, those sections of the movie will probably be infinitely better than this new one. Probably.
Yeah, I completely. I mean, Kate Blanchett, of course, gives an incredible performance. And by the way, having David Cross play Allen Ginsberg, one of the
Yeah,
greatest
that's a great that's
casting
a great
choices of all
casting.
time.
Yeah, I would have liked more of him. There's certain like performances and stuff where it's just kind of like, fuck, I want more of that person. More David Cross as Allen Ginsberg is really funny. More Christian Bale would have been great.
That Christian Bale stuff, I mean, I don't love the format of the Christian Bale stuff because, of course, that is the most sort of traditional biopic, which I know it's kind of
But it's
playing
like it's
off
like
of
making
that.
fun of it. It's like
It is
making
making
fun
fun
of
of
it.
it. It
Yeah, and
is
I
funny.
like Julian. I like Julian Moore as Joan Baez as well. Like
That
that
is
made me laugh
great.
so hard.
That is a great choice. But oh gosh, that version of Bob Dylan, that persona of Bob Dylan, the Christian Bale one, he's just so angry. And my favorite part of the Christian Bale story is that moment where he's like just completely wasted and he's at that award ceremony or whatever
Yeah,
shit he's at, and
yeah,
he fucking hates it, right? He's just pissed off at everybody. And he has that
yeah.
interview afterwards. Oh, that moment is just it's perfect. And of course, everyone kind of takes this persona a little differently and they come at it. And you have a lot of really great actors. I mean, you got Christian Bale,
It's a good cast.
Kate
Yeah,
Blanchett,
Heath
Heath
Ledger.
Ledger.
This
I
is
mean,
the
oh
last
my God.
movie I think that came out while he was still alive that he was in.
Yeah. Wow. That's crazy. That's
Like this
wild.
movie came out while he was still alive and then he died. And then he was in The Dark Knight with Christian
You
Bale
know,
later after
Dark
this.
Knight.
So
Yeah. It's weird.
yeah.
I mean, I've seen The Dark Knight so many times
Yeah,
because
me too.
that's like a movie for some
That's a
reason
great
I
movie.
watch like every Christmas Eve. I don't know how that started, but it's now a
I mean, it's
tradition.
a great movie.
And so I've seen Heath Ledger and other stuff, but it's so hard for me to make a disconnect
Right. And
between that
yeah.
performance and
Yeah.
this is a great performance. I mean, it's definitely Heath
Yeah.
Ledger being, Heath Ledger,
Heath Ledger
doing
Heath
his
Ledger
thing.
is like Heath Ledger's part of the movie is basically like represents kind of like Dylan's tumultuous like relationship with like women and with misogyny, I would say.
Yeah.
He like plays an actor that plays it's crazy. He plays an actor that plays the Christian Bale folk singer character in a
Which is
movie.
crazy.
It's a very it's very very like huh? It's just like wait, what? Like it's a little confusing. I mean, it's not that confusing, but it's cool. I think like you have and he's in a relationship he's in a relationship with the Charlotte Gainsbourg character who I think is supposed to be like Susie Rotolo,
I
which
think
is
so.
his girlfriend who he's on the cover with Freewheelin'. with Bob Dylan. That's what it's called, Freewheeling with Bob
The
Dylan.
Freewheeling Bob Dylan.
The Freewheeling Bob Dylan, yeah. He's on the cover, and they had like a relationship, and I don't think they were married, but I think like she's Charlotte Gainsbourg looks very much like her. She looks very much like Rotello. So I think that's why they picked her. But yeah, like that part of the movie is all about like, yeah, Dylan's just like, getting divorced and how that fucked him up.
Hmm. And I think a really great thing they do in this is each section, right? Each actor who plays, it's shot on something different. I mean, we have some stuff in digital, some stuff is shot on film, some stuff's
Right,
in
the
black and
color
white.
temperature is
Color
different.
temperature is different. I mean, you go back
Yeah,
to
this movie
yeah.
is shot by Edward Lockman, by the way, and he's fucking awesome. He's really good.
It looks I mean, this is incredible
It's a very good
looking
looking
movie.
movie.
I mean, I got everything in it, and I think my big problem with it, which is kind of what you're saying, the kind of all over the place, is it feels like most of these stories feel unfinished. They feel as if they are part of a story, but none of them feel like a full story. I mean, maybe the Billy the Kid one, I guess that one's probably the most holistic and like there's like a beginning, middle, and end of any of these stories. And of course, we spend the most
I
time
suppose.
with the Kate Blanchett one, which I have that
She
same,
dies.
yeah.
He dies. Yeah, the end of
Uh,
that one.
Again, the same problem with the Kate Blanchett part that you do, which is so much of the movie is the stuff that we already have of Bob Dylan. I mean, the stuff that we
Yeah.
actually know. And if this is supposed to be a mythologization of Bob Dylan, that I'm much more interested in the Woody stuff and the Christian Bale stuff and
I'm
the
very interested in
good
the Christian
stuff.
Bale stuff. I'm very much like I'm very much interested in the later personas and history of Bob Dylan than the early stuff. Because the 60s stuff is amazing, obviously. Like it's undeniable,
But we have so
untouchable,
much of
perfect.
that.
No, exactly. That's what I was gonna say. Like it's just like we know, like, it's just we're very aware of all of that now at
Like
this
that's just
point.
like when people think of Bob Dylan, that's the most famous Bob Dylan we think of because that's when he was most
Yeah.
in the public eye. And it's
Yeah.
good, and I love seeing it, and I love seeing that version of Bob
Yeah,
Dylan.
yeah. Mhm.
But there's another 40 years of Bob Dylan out there, and we kind of
I
get
agree.
snippets of that and parts of that. And I love that Christian Bale moment, which this is a real thing that happened. I mean, a lot of the stuff isn't real, but when he went electric and he was booed off
Of course. Yeah,
stages,
yeah. That yeah, yeah.
which is a great moment. I really love that moment because like Bob Dylan just doesn't give a shit. I mean, he does not fucking care what anyone thinks.
Yeah, those sections of the movie do also like they obviously quote things verbatim, like calling him Judas, and then he says back to them, "I don't believe you." That's verbatim, like things that are actually like recorded and said during that time. But again, you have "Don't Look Back," and "Don't Look Back" has all that stuff. It has all that stuff of like British people, British like journalists and fans being extremely annoying and being very like,
As the British always are.
yeah, they're just like for some reason like that tour, like it was just like everybody was like really annoying and terrible for the most part. I do like how it kind of like escalates things a little bit, and that's in the part in that Tom Haynes kind of adds like when the guy in the hotel like tries to stab the Kate Blanchett character.
Yeah.
That stuff is funny. It's just like, oh yeah, what if someone did like it really did get that crazy, huh? Didn't it? I mean, I don't think that actually did happen in real life. I don't think it reached that point, but it could have. I could see that happening.
Oh yeah.
Y- you know, hmm
People are absolutely crazy, and they were they're
at the
so
time they were,
angry.
yeah.
They were so angry at Bob Dylan, and Bob Dylan's just his ability to just not care at all, and just he just did whatever the fuck he wanted. He didn't really give a shit about any of that stuff. And I just we keep jumping from one character to another character and back, and I get that there's supposed to be this sort of holistic vibration that's going on in this piece where when something happens to one character, we see it related in the other character and we go back and forth. But it feels disjointed and it doesn't feel connected enough. I mean, there's just not enough. It's not like,
I
right?
think
There's
every
nothing really.
story. No, I think I no, like I said, I think that the whole project in general is like kind of failed just because I think you're kind of left a little empty, I think. I think more or less every story. I think it's but there's so much effort and I think every story does more or less have like a good beginning and end. I thought the ending of the Heath Ledger story was moving. I thought the end of the Billy the Kid story was moving. I thought that the end of the I'm trying to think what else.
I feel like the Woody story, I wanted more of that. I mean,
More of
we
that. I
got
wanted more Christian Bale, more Woody.
Christian
The
Bale.
Woody was fine. More Christian Bale. Um, having Arthur Rambeau in there was a little weird. I don't really care about Arthur Rambeau all that much.
Yeah, that stuff didn't really. I mean, that's basically the same stuff that Kate Blanchett does. Like, there's
I
not.
agree with you. Yeah.
I just didn't understand the
Yeah.
point. It didn't really add anything. Like, there's no new persona there. I mean,
Like
he's
I
basically
understand
the
that
same thing.
Rambo was like a really big like part of his life, very early influential stuff. I kind of like the idea of like using historical characters to kind of like maybe like mode like different versions of Dylan. So like, you have like Arthur Rambo, Billy the Kid, Woody Guthrie. Like these people like are extremely influential to Bob Dylan and they were around before him. And now you have like people who were, go on, now you have like people that actually do kind of like represent Bob Dylan and things that he went through. So I kind of like that stuff, but kind of cutting to Arthur Rambo and stuff of like Ben Whishaw, like pretending to be Arthur Rambo and saying stuff like that. That stuff isn't necessarily bad. It's just kind of like, I could take it or leave it.
Yeah, I I completely agree. And it's just the tendons, that hold this whole thing together. They feel very loose, and
Yeah,
it
like
can be
sometimes like
hard
characters will
to.
be dreaming of other characters.
Yeah,
Supposedly, it
it
feels
can
like.
it can get very convoluted at times, and all these things kind of thrown in. And there's nothing wrong with the piece being complex or even convoluted. And my complaint isn't so
I
much that.
appreciate that it is.
Yeah, I really appreciate that, and I appreciate that it is very much leaning into the sort of absurdity of Bob Dylan and embracing the idea that we cannot understand Bob Dylan as a character. It's fundamentally impossible to understand the character Bob Dylan because he refuses to be understood, and I embrace that. But it doesn't feel like from the beginning of the story to the end of the story, there's really this whole push, this proper plot. I mean, not that you need the traditional plot of a story, but I mean, yeah, there's sort of these things that happen, and each piece kind of pushes the other piece forward. But by the end of the piece, it doesn't feel like we've. It kind of just feels like we've watched a bunch of random footage, kind of like all jumbled together, and it tries to be like have its rhyme and reason to it, but it's just it's so jumbled to me that I ended the piece just a little more confounded and confused, and perhaps not empty as you were saying, but just as if it's like a really, really, really good idea, and I think he tries his best, but it's almost as if his ambition was higher than his filmmaking ability at that time. Like he just he shooted for something that I just don't think Todd Haynes at the time, which by the way, one of the, greatest filmmakers of the 21st century, I just don't think he was capable of yet. I mean, if he made this movie now, maybe it might be different, but
I mean, no, I think this is the best that he could have done, honestly. Like it's just like I just think it's just the nature of the project. The nature of the project is just kind of like daunting and complex. I just don't know what he would have done, what he could have done to like make it better, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's not. I'm trying to like give him grace, but it's still a movie that I think it is kind of a bit of a failure, but not a failure where I'm trying to like chastise him or anything like that. I'm just saying that like I don't know what else he could have done differently to make it not a failure. It's just kind of
like it's an
like a
impossible
impossible.
project.
But hey, I love Bob Dylan too. So I mean, I don't mind like watching.
I'm not complaining.
I'm not really complaining about any of like the details or references or anything like that. I'm not really like the kind of person that wants to watch a movie and point at things and being like, "Oh, that's the reference from the," like I'm not really that kind of guy, but
But
I
there is a
still
lot
kind
of
of
that.
there is a lot of that for the most part, but I think it's done like in a not. Again, I'm just imagining this new movie coming up and how annoying it's going to be and how stupid it's going to be. Like, I just think that like this movie, even when it's like kind of dumb, it's still probably going to be way more intelligent and astute and interesting than whatever this new movie is going to be. It's just going to be so stupid. It's unwieldy as I think is like I think a word, and it's just so yeah. I just have like a lot of problems with it, but I still can't help but like enjoy kind of like what it's doing at the heart of it, you know?
Yeah.
And of course it helps that, it's got Bob Dylan music all throughout it, which is great.
Love the Bob Dylan music. I'm surprised. I mean, we hear a lot of his big stuff, a lot of his famous stuff, but I'm surprised we didn't hear Tombstone Blues. I was very much, especially in a film like this that is so out there and is trying to do all these things. I think Tombstone Blues would have fit perfectly in a film like this. So that was like the one song that was surprised. Everything else, it was pretty much. I mean, they do blow on the track stuff. They do some early folk stuff. They do some of his electric stuff. I feel like another missed opportunity, the Pastor John stuff, which, by the way, Pastor John, when Christian Bale becomes
Yeah, Pastor
Christian,
John.
which of course Bob Dylan released three Christian albums because he thought he saw, or I don't know, believes, whatever.
Those albums,
Sees
I
Jesus
believe he's
Christ.
still Christian. He became a born again Christian, and I believe he still is. Or not a born again Christian, but he is still a Christian. Those albums are so underrated, though.
They legitimately are. I mean, I'm not a huge, well, actually, gospel
No,
music
they're
can be
good.
really great at times, but the genre he was playing with, which is kind of like the folk gospel Christian, isn't always great, and there's a lot of bad stuff in there. And those albums are so good, and I really wanted to hear something from those albums, especially in that Pastor John, and just more of that Pastor John stuff, because that's such a weird, just like absurd part of Bob Dylan's life that did happen. I mean, he did just become like completely sort of obsessed with this, and I guess he's still Christian, but sort of for like this short period of time, like this was kind of everything. And then those three albums are just really beautiful.
No, they're great. And I love them. I love Street Legal too. The album he made before. That album is like
Yeah.
kind of like lumped in there with that trilogy, I would say. It's
Hmm.
not like a born again, it was before he was born again
Yeah.
Christian, but I would say it's
Same
about as
sound.
manic. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of great stuff here. And then again, I mean, I would say the latest is probably Heath Ledger stuff. I think that's the latest Bob Dylan, like oldest version of Bob Dylan we get. And I think
Christian Bale is old.
in the Pastor John stuff, I guess he is.
Yeah.
But
The early
I'm
Pastor
saying
John
like
stuff.
we don't get like any of that 90s like folk revival, which is one of my favorite Bob Dylan eras. Those folk revival albums in like the mid to late 90s. I would have wanted to see that. And then of course you can't really do anything in the 2000s because that's at that point it becomes almost too surreal because it's too close to now. I think Todd Haynes needed the distance of the past for this to work in a certain sense because if one of these stories was sort of modern, that is in like the years between 2000 and 2007, that would have felt almost too weird even for a piece like this. I don't even know how you would
No, I would have loved it.
properly do that. Yeah, you'd want to see that. You'd want to see like a
I,
2000s
oh,
70-year
fuck
old
yeah.
Bob Dylan.
Those are some of the best albums. His
Oh yeah, there's some great
the
albums in there.
2000 stuff. That stuff is great. No, I would have. Fuck it. Whatever. I like that stuff a lot.
Yeah.
You wish you would have had a like more early, like early 60s. I guess like that's what the Woody Guthrie character is for.
No, 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 not that stuff. Like I want to see some of the 90s stuff. I mean,
Oh,
I do
90s
want more
stuff.
of the Woody stuff
Yes.
too. I want more of the Woody stuff, but there's no like 90s
90s
folk
stuff would be great.
revival,
Hmm.
late folk
Hmm.
revival.
I gotta say I'm a big fan of late folk revival. What albums are you specifically talking about? Are you talking about like Good as I've Been to You and stuff like that?
Yeah, World
The
Gone
World Gone
Wrong.
Wrong. World
Yeah,
Gone Wrong and Good as I've Been to You are great. I recommend listening to the soundtrack to the movie. It's 30 minutes longer than the movie itself.
really.
And it's kind of a hilarious soundtrack actually. Like it's like really cool. A lot of like really good covers by really like some of the best rock and singer-songwriter acts at the time. So like Sonic Youth, Jim James. Jim James is in the movie, by the way. He's
Yeah.
like the guy who's singing Going to Acapulco.
Hmm.
Stephen
Great
Malkmus
version.
appears like 3 or 4 times. Yeah, it's a really good version. Cat Power, Yola Tango is on it twice. Karen O has a decent cover. Jeff Tweedy has a good cover. Willie Nelson does an amazing cover of Senior Tales of Yankee Power, which is a great Dylan song, and he does a good job.
Wow.
Stevens has like a really good cover of Ring Them Bells, and it's not him
Really?
playing guitar. It's like a very like a fucking like All Delighted People, Illinois, Michigan, type of like production on it. It's really crazy. Tumberlane does a really great cover. Anthony and Johnson's does a great cover. Not gonna, it was really good. I actually kind of liked it. It just as a kind of like cover tribute album sort of thing. But yeah, I enjoyed listening to that. Maybe even more than the movie itself. That was badass.
That's incredible. That's a very that feels very much on point for this movie is to have a soundtrack that's actually longer than the movie itself,
I
and some
know.
really incredible musicians that they gathered together for both the film and the soundtrack, and which Todd Haynes just must have this like he must be just an extremely likable guy because the amount of just very good actors who are willing to work with him when obviously his budgets cannot be that large because there's no way any Todd Haynes movies make that much money. But he must just maybe people just know like he's just that good and that's why people want to work with him, or he's just really nice. And because I mean there's just so many big names in all of his stuff, and not big names necessarily in like extremely famous, although there are some, Kate Blanchett was very big at the time, and of course Christian Bale was, and some of these other people too. Because right, Christian Bale was Batman by this point, right? Batman Begins came out, and Heath Ledger also. That's weird. It's a weird coincidence that they're both in this movie and the Dark Knight, just like because Dark Knight came out in what 2008, so this was
Yeah.
around the same
No, I
time.
mean,
Okay.
again, it was right before it. No, I mean, like, if you've ever seen like Todd Haynes like interviews or anything like them, he just like seems like a very nice, affable guy. Yeah, I love his movies. I've seen quite a few of them now at this point. And the May December was one of the best movies of 2023. And this might be like the worst movie I've seen by him, but it's still like fine. Like
That's crazy.
I appreciate his perspective and his vision. It's one that I think is very necessary and great. It's just, I think like maybe the vision net didn't really proliferate into a film that I think is 100%, that I think is completely great and watchable. And this is kind of like a hard movie to recommend to someone who is even just like casually into Bob Dylan. I don't know if I could recommend this movie to someone who doesn't care at all about Bob Dylan. I don't think it's that compelling of a movie.
No, I was looking at some reviews on Letterboxd before we sat down to chat, and most of the 1 and 2 star reviews are people are like, I have no idea who Bob Dylan is. I'm like, you're not. You have to know. I mean, I guess you can
Yeah.
casually like Bob Dylan and watch this, but I think if you're not a big Bob Dylan fan, if like Bob Dylan isn't someone that you really admire, I just don't think you're gonna get a whole lot out of this because so much of it like Todd Haynes has no interest in trying to explain who Bob Dylan is. It subverts the biopic in a lot of ways, but I think the big thing here is that a biopic at its core is trying to explain who a person is. So there's this Blaze Foley biopic that came out like 6 or 7 years ago, and I didn't really know anything about Blaze Foley coming in, but coming out of that film, and it's a pretty good film. I think it's just called Blaze. It's definitely, I mean, it fits into the traditional biopic, but pretty all right. And I came out of that movie knowing a lot about Blaze Foley, and I listened to his music and I enjoyed it and had a good time. But if you come into something like this and you don't know who Bob Dylan is, I don't know. I don't think you're gonna like it. I don't think you're gonna have because it's just so much. It's
Yeah,
very
it's
referential to Bob Dylan, and so this movie becomes more enjoyable the more you know about Bob Dylan because you start getting all those references. And Todd Haynes has no interest in this film trying to explain anything that's going on in this movie. So if you don't already sort of grasp the absurdity of Bob Dylan itself and the way he existed in the world, this movie just becomes a piece of absurdist, almost surrealist piece of filmmaking when I think in actuality it is trying to grab and look at these different parts of Bob Dylan. But you have to know his music. You have to know the different genres he played in. You have to know that when we're looking at Pastor John, that Bob Dylan went into sort of a revivalist, born again Christian sort of thing. Or when you look at the Woody Guthrie version, that he was a huge
yeah.
Woody Guthrie
If
fan.
you know 0% about any of this, it's just like I just think it would be hard to care for a person who's
Yeah.
just I don't know. I think it would be really, really difficult to get someone to like get into that and really kind of,
But I think if you love Bob Dylan, you would love this movie and should love this movie. It's more, in many ways, a love letter to Bob Dylan and an appreciation for just kind of the mythology of this character, and really tries to capture all the things that are Bob Dylan, and in a way that this new biopic we keep talking about, the Timothy Chalamet one. There's no way it's gonna be good. I mean, like the Todd Haynes version is weird and ambitious, and yes, it has its problems, but kind of like you're saying, I don't really know another way to make this movie. I don't think there is another way. Like, there's nothing that this new biopic can possibly do that I'm Not There didn't do better. It's just, even though it's a flawed movie in any many ways, I just Bob Dylan himself is just like a very flawed character, quote unquote, that there's really just no other way to do this. I just don't think he can fit into a traditional biopic. Like, it doesn't work.
Yeah, and uh and again, I think the movie is still kind of like a pleasurable experience overall. I think that there is plenty to kind of I think there's plenty to go off of. And the music, it's helpful. Get into it, get into the story, get into the vibe. It is a hard movie to pin down. But it's at the grain of sand, which is a reference to a Bob Dylan song. The grain of sand movie poster looks exactly like the you know what I'm talking about, right? A face.
Yeah.
It looks exactly like the Face in a Crowd movie poster. Did you notice that?
Yes.
Why did he do that?
I don't know.
That's very interesting. I thought that was really, really funny. How it was just like grain of sand movie poster looks exactly like the Face in the Crowd movie poster.
This movie is so there's so many references to not only, of course, music and Bob Dylan, but also just cinema itself.
Yeah, I agree.
So many little things, right, that are so easy to miss, especially with the stuff with Heath Ledger because he's supposed to be an actor playing another version of Bob
Yeah.
Dylan. Just, all kinds of confusing in there. But there's just all kinds of moments like that. Like when they go to the movie theater and you see all those different posters and they're all fictional films, but you can tell like they're basically recreations of real films, but it's just like like
Right.
this world's just like slightly different than
Yeah.
our own, like it's alternative reality. And I do love those moments. But kind of going back to what you were saying earlier, I really love this movie, but I really struggle to talk about this movie, which is why I think I keep
No, I love talking
talking
about no that no
around.
that's my problem. Like talking about it is I could probably talk about this movie all day, right? Like because it's just like about a subject that I care a lot about and that I've sort of dedicated a lot of time to.
But like I struggle to talk about like the actual content of the film because I feel like we've talked about a lot of the stuff that surrounds the film, and about the film and about Bob Dylan, but like the actual stuff, the actual like plot and stuff, I really struggle to kind of
Well, who cares? Like it's
master.
just
So I
like
guess it
stuff
doesn't
that we
matter.
already know about. Like
Yeah.
right, like
Go
it's
watch
kind
the
of hard
movie.
to like how can we talk about the Kate Blanchett story? Like that stuff is pretty like we get it. I know that story well, very well enough. He's a folk guy. He quote unquote sells out and gets into like electric music. He becomes like inscrutable as he's like talking to journalists and stuff like that. And he's doing drugs and all this stuff. And then he gets into a motorcycle accident, which in the movie he dies, but in real life it just kind of sort of altered things where to the point too where he doesn't perform live, I think, for like several years. So, and I mean, like you and I know that story really well, so it's kind of hard to like find it all that interesting to kind of like recount the plot or anything like that. I just trying to like describe like how the movie kind of like feels to me. And again, I do like that part. I like how, yeah, I guess I didn't realize, was he in a relationship with Edie Sedgwick? Was that a real thing that he did? I was trying to like think about this.
I don't know, honestly. I I think so, but
Because she's in the movie, obviously under
yeah,
a different name, but she's in the movie. She appears as like a former lover of his, played
right.
by Michelle Williams. But I guess I didn't think they probably crossed paths at one point, but I know she was a lover of like John Cale and Lou Reed.
I mean, it would make sense, but I guess it doesn't really matter if it happened or not.
Right. She's just kind of there. Allen Ginsberg is there. He's hanging out. The
Love Allen
Beatles are there.
Ginsberg's
They're hanging out.
character
They're all hanging out
with
with
the
each other.
Beatles.
The Black Panther Party, they show up as well.
That's a great
Everybody's up.
scene
Yeah, just like
where he's like
everybody's hanging out.
explaining.
Yeah, like yeah, yeah, yeah. And of course, you have like you have that kind of like very the movie also has like a lot of like scenes and imagery that are very what's the word? Surreal. A lot of surreal stuff happening, where you have
Mhm.
like kind of like like Ballad of a Thin Man. You know, they kind of like take that song and they kind of like literalize it in like different
Mhm.
images and stuff, and that stuff's cool.
It's a great moment. I really love that. Ballad of the Man was for a long time one of my favorite Bob Dylan songs. So I really
It's a good one.
related with that. Yeah.
It's a good one.
I mean, there's just some like really creative use of filmmaking here, and just really willing to kind of pull out the wheelhouse and all these different editing techniques, and of course shooting on these different types of film and the color grading, and really leaning in on these performances, and they all give incredible performances here. And even not only is each section shot with different types of cameras, different film, but on top of that, there's a different style of filmmaking. I mean, if you look at the Kate Blanchett stuff, it looks like it was shot like Don't Look Back, right? It has that kind of 1960s documentary style to it. Or you talk about the Christian Bale stuff and has that more sort of later biopic, kind of looking back. Or if you look at that Woody Guthrie stuff, it kind of has that Ethan Cohen, "Oh Brother, Where
Yeah.
Art Thou" kind of,
Sure. Yeah.
visual effect to it. I find that so interesting because it forces our filmmakers here to sort of put on these different hats and let go of this idea. And I guess this is earlier in Todd Haynes' career, but you still have to let go of this idea of like Todd Haynes, right? It's not a Todd Haynes movie. It's rather like these different movies that Todd Haynes is trying to adapt and put into one piece. And you kind of have to let go of that ego a bit in a way where perhaps maybe some of Todd Haynes' other stuff, like Dark Waters, right? That's a Todd Haynes movie. Like you see it, it looks like it sounds like it does all the things.
I disagree. I think like there's still like a lot of him in there. If it wasn't in
Yeah.
there, then the movie would be way more boring and stupid and more lame than it was. I disagree with you.
Yeah, I mean, obviously Todd Haynes has his flair and he adds it to it, but I think what he's doing here is he's embracing the sort of just like Bob Dylan, right? Just like Bob Dylan embraces these different versions of himself, Todd Haynes is embracing these different filmmaking versions of himself and has to be willing to be these different types of filmmakers. And yeah, of course, I mean, Todd Haynes is always going to come through, right? Any good filmmaker, their look, their style, their auteurness is still going to come through in the visuals and the storytelling itself. But I think in a certain sense, you kind of have to let go of that so you can be in these different worlds in the way that the film of Heath Ledger looks differently and shot differently and is a different type of story than like the Billy the Kid one or the Woody Guthrie one or all these different ones. But and that's not a complaint by any means. I think if anything, it is a praise of just the chameleon-like ability to kind of hide in these, not perhaps hide isn't the word, but embrace these filmmaking styles and just a real understanding of filmmaking as a way of telling a story. But I still wish there was less of that Kate Blanchett stuff. I mean, she's so good, and I
Yeah,
understand why
she
that's the
is a very
stuff people
transformative
remember.
performance. Yeah.
I mean, it's incredible performance. I understand why you keep all this stuff in, but again, as we've said a couple of times now, we've seen that stuff. We know that stuff. That's the stuff we're most familiar with.
Have you ever seen Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid? Have you ever seen that movie before?
I have not. Have you?
No, I haven't yet. I should though.
It's been on the list for a really long time because, of course, Bob Dylan. Does Bob Dylan play Billy the Kid in that movie, or does he play someone
No,
else?
he doesn't. He plays someone else in that movie,
Okay, I know he's in it
but
though.
he's in it, and he did the
Yeah,
music, of course.
right. And great
And
album.
knocking on
Not gonna
heaven's
have his
door is, of
doors.
course, on that album. Yeah,
Yeah.
I like that he's in it. Billy the Kid is just in it, like old Billy the Kid. I fuck with that. I don't have much to say about that. It's just
No,
I like that part of the movie.
Bob Dylan. He wasn't really in any other movies, right? I'm not. He didn't have.
No, he was in a lot of movies.
Was he?
No, he
What
was in
was
a
he
lot of
in?
movies. Well, I wouldn't say a lot of movies, but he was in a bunch of movies. Like he appeared in a lot of movies. He was in this movie, I think movies in like he was in this one
Oh
movie in I
wow.
think like the 80s or 70s called like Hearts of Fire or something on it like that. And it was like a terrible failed movie.
Oh, is it Catch Fire? Is that the one you're talking about?
No.
No.
That's I believe that's a
Catch
that was
Fire
a
is a
movie that was
Dennis Hopper movie.
yeah, Dennis Hopper movie that he was in. Yeah. I think I think Bob Dylan with movies, I feel like it's a complicated relationship because in 2001 he won an Academy Award for Best Original Song for this great song Things Have Changed for the film Wonder Boys.
Hmm.
And I think after that it became more. appropriate to include Bob Dylan more in his films. Another movie that he was in that I think he might have done the music for was a it was a movie it's a movie directed by what was his name? Larry Charles. It's a Larry Charles movie from 2003, and it's like a it has like this like crazy cast, and like Bob Dylan is in the movie. He plays like a major role in it. We gotta watch. I gotta watch that one too eventually. But it was like a big failure when it came out.
The Masked and Anonymous.
Masked and anonymous. Yeah, yeah. Written by Bob Dylan and Larry Charles. So I gotta watch that one as well.
That's so
Yeah,
strange.
I know. I can't wait. I really would love to watch it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love Bob Dylan a lot because for me, like he's just the gift that keeps on giving.
His new songs.
There's so much work. He's done so much work. He just never stopped. He's so prolific. There's so many things to discover and like listen to and like watch. It's just never ending. I'm still doing it.
I know it's crazy that, this man, I mean, how old is Bob Dylan now? Is he in his 90s? He's 80s, right? He's born in
He's
1941.
82.
He's 82. This man just, he will not stop. I mean, for 82
Yeah,
years, he has just been like giving it his all and just time and time again. I mean, just the prolific amount of work he has produced, not only in music, but in film. And it's all of it is just, it's just crazy that a single human being, any single human being could just be this much, right? Could just do this much. I mean, you think of like other famous, you think of someone like the Beatles, right? They only released what, 6 albums or maybe 7 albums in their entire
I
career.
think it was a little bit more than that, but yeah, they it was they
I mean, they were only around
compared to
for
Bob Dylan, of course, a very
right,
small
which
amount of music.
right. I mean, compared to almost any musician, it's just, gosh, it's great to see. And to see, I mean, of course, there are people of Bob Dylan's era and later who became famous for that one thing and they just stuck with that, right, for the rest of their lives and still tour kind of playing those same, top 12 songs or, couple of albums that were really famous and could never grow or change. And yet with Bob Dylan, he's just I remember in one interview, and of course, any interview with Bob Dylan, you have to take with a certain grain of salt because it is Bob Dylan. But he talked about how when he wrote the songs of sort of his younger self, this is an older individual now, more recently, and he says, I was a different person back then. Like I can never write the stuff I did
Right, he
then.
doesn't know. Yeah,
I do now.
yeah,
Like I don't know that person, right? That's a different
right. I
person.
know what you're talking about. It's like the 60 Minutes interview.
It legitimately is. I mean, if you listen to, something from early Bob Dylan, especially maybe it was for maybe Freewheelin' Bob Dylan, and then you listen something from like Street Legal, and then you listen to like Blood on the Tracks. They're such different albums, and other than his very distinct voice, I mean, you'd have a hard time realizing that it's the same person. So, really incredible. But I guess we are
This episode is just for us to like talk about like an
Bob
excuse to
Dylan.
talk about Bob Dylan on a main episode.
It's just us fangirling out for an hour and some minutes. I'm so excited for that concert, man. God,
It's gonna be good. I wonder if he'll play guitar.
he's gotta. I don't know. He's been playing
He
piano
doesn't
a
play
lot lately,
guitar.
though, right? He
No, he
mostly
just
just
like
plays.
yeah, he doesn't play guitar. Well, he did play guitar in Noblesville.
Okay.
But when we saw him, he played piano and he played piano the whole time.
I mean, I imagine he's probably not gonna play
It's
much
gonna be like an
guitar
outdoor
because
arena, right?
yeah, it's outdoor and it's Willie Nelson and John Mellencamp. So I don't know why he would also be playing guitar. They're
Well,
also
why not? I mean,
asking.
I don't.
They're asking about the set, and I'm like, I have no idea. I imagine it's just gonna be a lot of Americana.
What'd you say?
What the set is gonna be.
What's that in particular?
Like what they're gonna
Who
play.
is asking?
Emily was asking.
Oh, Bob Dylan is just gonna play his new songs. He's not gonna play any old songs. Well, I don't know about that actually. Well, this tour is different than the Rough and Rowdy Ways tour. When we
Right.
saw him at the Rough and Rowdy Ways tour in Indy, he played every single song off of his new album, and
Which
then
is a
a
great
handful
album.
of and then yes, and then a handful of like random tracks that he's done that that really aren't very super famous Bob Dylan tracks or anything like that. Like he did Granite Sand,
Right.
which is an amazing song, but if you're a casual Bob Dylan fan, you're probably
You're
not
not
going
gonna
to
know
know that
Grace
one.
Young.
So he's not going to play Highway 61 Revisited or anything. You
No.
know what I
I
mean?
thought
Like,
that would be
so
but I mean
it's going to be an inscrutable
but I mean with
set
with
list.
with Bob Dylan, Willie Nelson, and John Mellencamp, are they just gonna play together? Like that's my assumption is they're
No,
just gonna play as a band, or are
no,
they
it's
just they're gonna be
no, they're not gonna play as a band.
really?
It's one after another, Austin.
Wow. Okay.
Considering the order, you've never been you don't know anything about music. It's gonna be it's I think like when you go there, you'll see Mellencamp probably play for like an hour, Dylan play for an hour, and then Willie Nelson play for an hour, is what I'm assuming the show is like. It's not gonna be a band.
Yeah. The concert starts at 5:30 on a Sunday. Isn't that
That's what I'm
weird?
saying. Because no, because it's really long. It's gonna take like 3 or 4 hours.
John Mellencamp, I guess I'm probably the least. I mean, I've listened to his stuff before, and of course, coming from Indiana
I'd be on my phone.
during the
I'd be
John
on my phone
Mellencamp
during
stuff.
that set. Yeah. I don't really
Yeah,
care all that much, but
I'm
I'll
probably
be
the
there.
least
I would be
familiar with
there.
his stuff, but yeah, I'll be there for it. I'm guessing John Mellencamp will play first.
No, definitely. I think it again, it's I believe Mellencamp, Dylan, and then Willie. Yeah.
Lily's so old. He's like 92 years
He's
old.
really old too. He's
So
older
fucking
than
old.
Dylan, I believe. Yeah.
He is. He's like
Yep.
10 years older than just a bunch of old people. It's gonna be fun. It's gonna be a great
Yeah, a bunch
time.
of old men.
It's
Yeah.
just that whole. I imagine Emily and I are gonna be like the youngest people there,
It's
significantly.
possibility, unless like some people bring their kids or
What was it
something
like
like
when you
that.
went to the Bob Dylan concert? Was it mostly
It was a
older?
pretty diverse group of people, but yeah, there were a lot of old people, of course. A lot of old rowdy people. But it's
Well,
different. I'm assuming it'll be different though there because it's going to be an outdoor concert with all
right.
kinds of different people. It's going to be a much bigger area.
Yeah, I'm really excited. I've never been to this venue before, but it's a really beautiful part. It's like right outside of like 60 miles outside of Sacramento. So it's gonna be hot as hell. God, it's gonna be so fucking hot. You know how hot it gets in Sacramento? It
Yeah,
gets
it
to like
will be.
110. It's gonna be it doesn't matter. It'll be worth it.
Yeah, I agree.
It'll
No, it'll
definitely.
be good.
So very excited. But yeah, we should probably wrap this
Yeah,
episode.
let's wrap it up.
We are pushing a little over an hour.
Yeah, I'll just say, okay,
Yeah.
look, I'll just say real quick again, just to kind of like just quickly condense what I was saying before. Just, very interesting movie. Obviously, the subject matter is very interesting to me. Obviously, again, not really a movie I would recommend to anyone in particular except freaks like me, unless you're a freak like me. I like the perspective. I like what it's doing. I like what it's trying to do. I like the cast. Obviously, the music's good. Edward Lockman, great cinematography from him. I'm going to give it a very, very, very low 6 out of 10, like bordering on a 5. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, as we talked about, it definitely has its problem, but I think it's physically impossible for me not to love a Bob Dylan creation because of both our loves for Bob Dylan. And I would say if I could only listen to one musician for the rest of my life, I had to give up all music and I listened to a shit ton of music, but if I only had to listen to one musician for the rest of my life, it would be Bob Dylan. I mean, he's just someone that I remember hearing this study a couple of times that the music you listen to when you're 18, 19 years old is the music you remember most because your brain's just like in this weird state of, it's still building synapses and it's not fully grown yet. But for some reason, like people always sort of harken back to that time. And Bob Dylan was the person I discovered. I mean, I think honestly, in many ways, Bob Dylan is the reason I love music so much now because honestly, when we were in high school, of course, we were in jazz band and we were musicians and we did all that stuff. I mean, I was never really that good. I liked music and I liked playing music, but I really didn't love music until I found Bob Dylan, and it just kind of opened the world of music to me. And he's the reason that I listen to so much fucking music now, and have a 200 plus collection of vinyls, and force my students to listen to just all kinds of nonsense from different genres and eras is because of Bob Dylan and his love for music. So for that reason alone, I can't help but give this film an 8 out of 10. I mean, I'm just so happy when I watch this because I love Bob Dylan so much. And it has a lot of flaws and there are a lot of problems with it. And I would not suggest this movie to anyone who doesn't already love Bob Dylan. I think even if you're a casual listener to Bob Dylan, you're not really going to
Yeah, you wouldn't.
enjoy this film. It's just it's for a
So
very
it's over
specific
2 hours. It's
audience.
also 2 hours. Oh, it's over 2 hours long.
Yeah, it's also very long. So not for everybody, but for me, it's exactly what I needed. So
Gotcha. Cool.
all right, y'all. Thank you for listening. You can find everything I do at Austin Lugo.
I'm on Letterboxd at Retro Andrew, RETR0 Andrew.
And you can find this podcast wherever you hear podcasts. You also find us on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube at With Nothing to Say. Thank you all for listening.
Thank you again.